If Pixar villains were charged for their crimes, Nemo, Monster Incorporated, and Ratatouille. Our childhood has been graced with many amazing animated movies, and while they have good morals, they do have some amazing villains too. While they might look cool and unforgiving, they aren't above the law. So let's look at some of these villains and see what they could be charged with for their crimes. Let the jury begin.
Oh yeah, a fish can breathe out here.
Finding Nemo. This fish is something that should never get caught up in your fishing line. We were introduced to the barracuda in the early scenes of the movie, and we saw him attacking Marlin and Dory.
Coral! Coral?
He even stole 399 eggs, and maybe even ate them. He murdered Dory and assaulted Marlin, and we can't let this go. Even though these fishes aren't fond of spinach and they can't go vegan, assuming that there are no butcher sharks selling meat, it is still a crime to murder and eat someone's egg. They will likely be sentenced to death for infanticide, and the method of punishment will be throwing it out of the ocean. Apart from that, we have the anglerfish who attempted murder, and this might get him 25 years in prison with a chance of bail after 20 years. The anglerfish is going to live in a small pond with frogs for 25 years. Now let's look at the shark trials. Bruce, Anchor, and Chum are the big bad bully who attempted to murder and successfully murdered fish.
Come on, let's get this over with.
Right then, the meeting has officially come to order.
For this, Chum is going to pay for his murder living right next to the anglerfish in a slightly larger pond with frogs. As for Bruce and Anchor, they will be in detention and behavioral management therapy and community service. Well, fishes are fishes and they don't care about the consequences, but what about Dr. Philip Sherman and Darla?
And a piranha's a fish, just like your present.
Darla can easily be charged with fish cruelty and manslaughter, getting herself a cell in a juvenile and 6 months of community service. But since she is a minor and she didn't do it intentionally, she'll be with her Uncle Sherman in community service. Now what about Dr. Philip Sherman? Don't get me wrong, he is a good guy, but he can be charged with 1 count of kidnapping if the judge was a blue whale and the ocean was a city.
Present. Little guy.
But his intentions weren't bad, and he was just trying to help poor Nemo, but he kidnapped other fish as well. But as the movie goes, he is an apprentice to Darla, supplying fish to kill. And even though it wasn't planned, he will be jailed for a year with a fine of 10 kilograms of fish food. But don't get me wrong, if he knew what he was doing, he would be sentenced to life in prison. Monster Incorporated. Randall is Slytherin, who has done many bad things in the entire course of the movie. He has kidnapped and tortured monsters and child abduction and abuse. When their friend came to rescue, he went as far as trying to kill, for which he can be charged to kill. Then when they were escaping, Randall tried to kill them by throwing them off a great height. Randall is going to get charged with kidnapping, attempted torture, child abduction, child abuse, assault with intent to kill, and first-degree attempted murder. He is going to get a life sentence with no chance of parole. Next up is Water Noose. It was a snowstorm and Mr. Water Noose abandoned 2 of our favorite characters in it. I am not being biased, but that is unlawful banishment.
No!
And then we know that Randall is just a henchman for Mr. Water Noose, and he is behind mass child abduction conspiring. He will be charged with unlawful banishment and conspiracy to commit mass child abduction. The Incredibles. Bomb Voyage sounds like a terrorist, but he isn't.
Bon voyage.
C'est incroyable! And incredible!
Even though it is not confirmed, we can say he has committed multiple crimes, some of them being bank robbery, vandalism, robbery, and attempted murder. He is a great threat to society, and it does not seem like he is going to stop anytime soon, so he is going to be charged with life in prison with no chance of parole. But he also might get a job helping the FBI solve other crimes committed by other criminals running wild in the world. His area of expertise is a much-needed insight to officers, but he still has to pay for attaching a bomb to a child, which could be an attempt to murder a minor. Since it was only an attempt, he might just be on the edge of the good books with a chance to repent. The Underminer, on the other hand, isn't as strong as Bomb Voyage and is much less sinister. His role has been short and sweet and was only to pose a risk, but that doesn't mean we're going to let him slide. He is going to be charged with disruption of peace and vandalism. Despite his brief appearance, he is a threat to society and a menace. Yes, caused major damage to public property and destructed peace in society, which is not as serious as a bomb voyage, but he does not necessarily commit any gruesome crimes, so he might be charged with a couple of years in prison with a chance of parole if he manages to reform himself and become a better man. Next up is Gilbert Hugh, the head of Insura Care, the company where Bob gets his money from. He is a white-collar man with a black-collar job, secretly duping people out of their money through his company.
I don't want to know about their coverage, Bob. Don't tell me about their coverage. Tell me how you're keeping Insura Care in the black. Tell me how that's possible with you writing checks to every Harry Hardluck and Sally sob story that gives you a phone call.
Even though he might not seem like a bad person, he does have a couple of crimes to his name. He persuades his employee, Bob, to commit insurance fraud, and looking at this, it seems like he has been doing this for a long time. It seems like he has asked every one of his employees to do the same. He can get so persuasive, sometimes even going as far as threatening to fire them if they don't follow his instructions. Despite having such a record, it wasn't violent, so he will be charged with fraud and criminal coercion of property. He will have to pay a hefty fine and spend a couple of years in prison and do a bit of community service. But if they investigate, there could be more to him than what meets the eye, and he does not care about the law, so considering all of these, we might have to revoke his license and close his company.
Switch targets. Over.
Trust me, this is the one he's been looking for.
Mirage is the infamous apprentice to Syndrome, and she has a lot to pay for. She had Bob take care of the Omnidroids. She can be seen stalking Bob and Frozzo. She causes the destruction of property when her tablet explodes, causing sprinklers to get activated. She even goes on to persuade Bob to fight against the Omnidroids. This could be an attempt to murder Bob 2 times, and then go on to do the same with Helen, Dash, and Violet.
If you accept, your payment will be annual salary. Call the number on the card. Boys, the supers aren't gone, Mr. Incredible. You're still here. I can listen to police scanners.
She only did them under strict orders from Syndrome, so if she confesses to all the crimes in court, she might get a linear sentence. We also saw her team up with the good guys by the end of the movie, which could lessen her sentence. But what is done, and she will be charged with stalking, destruction of property, and attempted murder. She won't have dire consequences, and it could go to about a decade in prison with a chance of parole. But considering her being on the good side and helping the Incredibles and being a witness to all the crimes Syndrome has committed, her charges could be dropped. Now let's talk about Syndrome. Syndrome wanted to become a part of the Incredibles and even dropped himself as the Incrediboy.
But man, it wasn't good enough! After you trashed the last one, I had to make some major modifications. Sure, it was difficult, but you are worth it.
But he was not allowed in, so he became the villain, creating the Omnidroids to eliminate his former favorite heroes. The first crime he committed was breaking into someone else's property, and in this case, it was Bob's car. He has committed 18 counts of murder, and he tried to murder Incredible 2 times. But that does not stop there, even went on to annihilate all of Bob's family. He attempted to murder Helen, Dash, and Violet with his Omnidroid. When he released the Omnidroid, he caused a lot of destruction in the city, destroying public property, destroying peace, and committing vandalism. He also kidnapped Jack. His crime tells us that he is mentally unstable and a threat to humanity. He can easily come into the ranks of serial murder and tempted murderers, including the destruction of property and vandalism. He poses a great risk to society. He has to go into a psychological evaluation, and if found sane, he will be subjected to execution. If he is found psychologically unstable, he will have to spend the rest of his life in a mental asylum.